October 1988. Inside the Plaza Hotel, workers begin removing fixtures that have survived for generations. Not because the building is collapsing, not because a fire has damaged the rooms, because the hotel has been bought on debt and debt demands cash. In a place built to feel permanent, the first thing to disappear is the illusion that permanence is free. If you have ever stood at Fifth Avenue in Central Park South and looked up at the plaza, you know the feeling it sells. Old money, old manners, old certainty. A city inside a building, polished to the point where time seems to slow down. But iconic places are not protected by beauty alone. A landmark can be celebrated by movies and praised by guidebooks, and still be vulnerable to the simplest force on earth. A spreadsheet. The plaza is not just a hotel. It is a story New York tells about itself. A story about luxury and power. A story about who gets to belong. And, eventually, a story about what happens when a symbol is treated like a machine for extracting value. To understand the plaza, we have to follow its life in the order it actually happened. How it was built, how it became a myth, how owners tried to turn that myth into profit, how preservation tried to freeze a few rooms in time while everything else kept moving, and how the building learned to survive by changing while pretending it had not changed. This is the story of the plaza, a legend made of stone and labor, a landmark that could not escape the market, and a corner of Manhattan where memory and money have been negotiating for more than a century. Chapter 1. The corner that invented a standard. At the start of the 20th century, New York is becoming a modern empire. Steel frames climb upward. Electric light spreads through neighborhoods. New money is arriving fast, and it wants settings worthy of its speed. This is the world of department stores, grand avenues, and social pages. A world where wealth does not only buy comfort, it buys visibility. If you are rich, you are expected to look rich, and the city is expected to provide the right stages. Fifth Avenue is turning into a corridor of display. Central Park has become a giant public garden beside some of the most valuable land on the continent. To stand at this corner is to stand at an intersection of two fantasies: nature made orderly and money made elegant. There is already a hotel on this site in the 19th century. The address is perfect, yet the building does not define the word luxury. That is the opportunity. A businessman named Harry S. Black helps drive the decision to build a new plaza on a scale that feels almost reckless. The budget is about $12.5 million, an enormous sum for the time. The number is not only a cost, it is a declaration. This will not be a hotel that competes. This will be a hotel that dominates. Black chooses an architect who understands how to design luxury as theater. Henry Janeway Hardenberg has already shaped the city's idea of high-end hospitality. He knows that a grand hotel is not a box of rooms. It is a choreography, a sequence of emotions built into stone. Hardenberg designs arrival as a ritual. A person steps out of the street, where the city has no patience, and into a space where patience is part of the price. Vestibules soften noise. Doorways frame the guest. The lobby opens with a kind of confidence that tells you you are expected to be impressed. The new plaza is inspired by French Renaissance chateaux. Not because New Yorkers truly want to be French nobles, but because the style carries a coded promise: old world legitimacy, tradition, wealth that looks inherited even when it is new. Construction begins in 1905. The work is physical and loud. Steel rises first. Then the stone skin arrives, turning the structure into a pale cliff on the edge of the park. The roof will develop the green patina that later becomes part of the image, a color that makes the building look older than it is. That is not an accident. A building that wants to be timeless must look as if it has already existed for a long time. Behind the facade, modern systems are installed. This is the future dressed as the past. The hotel features an unusually high number of private baths for its era, a signal that it is selling comfort at a level most Americans have not yet experienced. Telephones are installed in rooms. Mechanical systems are designed to make service smooth and fast. Even the flow of messages is modernized through pneumatic tubes. In a city moving at new speed, information must move too. But the most important features are the ones that turn ordinary life into ceremony. A lobby designed to slow you down and reset your posture. The palm court, with a glass ceiling that turns daylight into atmosphere. A ballroom that can convert a gathering into an event that feels historic while it is happening. Corridors that allow staff to move with invisibility. service entrances that make the labor disappear so the magic can remain. The plaza opens on the 1st of October 1907. It does not simply join New York. It teaches New York a new standard. Guests do not only buy a room, they buy the feeling that they have crossed into a higher register of life. They buy a kind of calm that does not exist outside, a calm produced by many hands working in coordination. And for the people who already belong, the hotel gives them a public stage where belonging can be performed without explanation. From the beginning, the plaza sells a boundary, not a fence or a wall, a behavioral line. Step inside and you are expected to move differently, speak differently, dress differently. The building does not only shelter luxury, it manufactures it. And manufacturing requires a supply chain. Here, the supply chain is human. Doormen, bell staff, housekeepers, engineers, cooks, porters, waiters, attendants, people who do not appear in the postcards, but without whom the postcards would feel like lies. That invisible workforce is what turns the plaza from architecture into institution. The plaza also arrives at a time when hotels are changing the social geography of the city. Private mansions still exist, but the hotel offers something a mansion cannot. A neutral stage, a place where people can meet without admitting they are hosting. A place where business can be disguised as leisure and leisure can be disguised as business. That neutrality matters in a dense city where reputations travel fast. A hotel lobby allows distance. You can be close enough to conduct power and far enough to deny it. You can invite someone to tea without inviting them into your life. You can hold a dinner without turning your home into a public exhibit. This is one reason the plaza becomes an institution so quickly. It is built not only for travelers, but for New York's elite routines. It is built to be used as a public living room for private influence. And influence leaves traces, not in official records, but in the way certain corners become known for certain meetings, the way certain tables become associated with certain deals, the way the staff learns, without being told, which guests must never be interrupted. From the beginning, then, the plaza is not only selling beauty, it is selling a kind of controlled access. If you have money, the building becomes a tool. If you do not, it becomes a window you can stand near and look through. Chapter 2. The myth is made by routine. People love to tell the plaza story through famous names and glamorous nights. But the legend is not built by celebrity. It is built by repetition. Luxury, at its core, is a system that works every time. Day after day, the plaza repeats the same rituals. A doorman opens the door at precisely the right moment. A bellman takes a bag without needing instruction. A receptionist holds attention without curiosity. A waiter pours tea without hurry. A housekeeper turns a room back into a stage as if no one ever lived there. These gestures look effortless. That is the point. Effortless luxury is the hardest kind to produce. The hotel becomes a small city with districts. The lobby, a public square where arrivals and departures create constant motion. The palm court, where afternoon tea becomes a ceremonial use of daylight. Dining rooms and bars, where deals and gossip can share a table. Corridors and service elevators, where staff movement is engineered to be invisible. The palm court matters because it turns leisure into a public act. Afternoon tea is not only food and drink, it is a way to occupy time in a way that signals control over time. To sit under glass and let daylight become decoration is to say you are not in a hurry like everyone else outside. It is also a way to be seen without having to speak loudly, a form of quiet display. Other rooms carry different moods. Dark wood rooms, like the Oak Room and Oak Bar, historically offer an atmosphere of membership. Not formal membership, but the feeling that you are part of the inner circle. For decades, these spaces reflect the gendered social codes of the era, codes that shaped who was welcome and who was not. Even when those codes loosen, the rooms keep their aura. They feel like places where power is spoken quietly and taken seriously. The Grand Ballroom is built for a different kind of display. Ballrooms exist to turn a gathering into a statement. They are rooms where the ceiling height itself becomes an argument about importance. When the plaza hosts a grand event, the building does not just provide space, it provides legitimacy. This is why the plaza becomes a cultural shorthand. Writers and filmmakers use it the way they use a crown or a castle. You do not need explanation. A single shot of the façade tells the audience what to think. Money. Old money. New York money. Yet the myth is supported by people the camera usually ignores. A place like this is held together by a hidden school of manners. Workers learn how to be present without being intrusive, how to anticipate without guessing wrong, how to protect a guest from embarrassment, including the embarrassment of being treated like a normal person. They learn when to speak and when to vanish. They learn how to make the building feel like it has no friction. And they learn discretion. Discretion is not a slogan. It is a discipline. It means you do not repeat what you heard at a table. It means you do not stare at a celebrity. It means you understand that the guest is paying partly to feel that their life is safe inside the building. A grand hotel sells privacy and attention at the same time, and the staff must know how to deliver both without mixing them. This knowledge is not written down. It is passed down. A craft tradition hidden inside uniforms. There is also a second population that gives the plaza its peculiar character. Long-term residents. For much of the 20th century, some people do not simply stay at the plaza. They live there. They treat the hotel as a grand apartment building with an invisible staff and a social life that never requires a subway ride. To live at the plaza is to live inside a promise that everything can be handled. A stain can be erased. A problem can be absorbed. A request can be met. The building offers a feeling of control, and that feeling becomes part of the brand. Residents create continuity. They see staff become fixtures. They see new managers arrive with new rules. They notice when a room changes its lighting and suddenly feels less warm. They notice when the dining room menu becomes simpler, or when a familiar face behind the bar is no longer there. These are small changes, but small changes are how a place loses its soul. The plaza is also a witness. It watches wars arrive first as headlines, then as uniforms in the lobby. It watches economic booms and crashes reshape the mood of the city. It watches fashions change and manners loosen. It watches the city switch from horses to cars, from letters to phones, from private parties to televised culture. After the First World War, the plaza expands. From 1919 to 1921, an annex designed by Warren and Wetmore is added. The goal is not only to add rooms, it is to keep pace with a midtown that is gaining density and height. The plaza learns a lesson that is purely New York. If you want to remain iconic, sometimes you have to grow. Then come the hard years. The Great Depression hits and the entire city tightens. A grand hotel survives by adjusting operations, leaning on reputation, and continuing to offer a controlled world when the outside world feels unstable. Luxury, even in hard times, can be sold as reassurance. If you can afford it, you can still pretend the crisis is somewhere else. During the Second World War, New York is crowded and anxious. The plaza remains in place, absorbing the city's tension and continuing its routines. This is another reason it becomes symbolic. It is not only a symbol of wealth, it is a symbol of continuity, a place that looks stable when the world does not. By the post-war decades, the plaza has become more than a hotel. It has become part of the city's language. People use the name as a reference point. They say it the way they say Central Park or Broadway. It becomes shorthand for a certain kind of New York confidence. In 1966, the plaza becomes the stage for one of the most famous parties of the century. Truman Capote holds the black and white ball in the Grand Ballroom. It becomes a cultural moment built from guest lists and camera flashes. But even that glamorous night relies on the same daily infrastructure as afternoon tea. Staff who know how to make chaos look like grace. A building designed to absorb noise and still feel controlled. The building amplifies the event, turning a party into a myth. That is the plaza paradox. It is public and private at once. A place where you can be seen and a place where you can hide. A building that invites attention while offering discretion. And in New York, discretion is valuable. Value attracts buyers, and buyers bring a new set of priorities. Behind the scenes, the plaza functions like an industrial operation wrapped in velvet. Laundry must run constantly. Linens are counted and replaced. Silver is polished until it reflects light like a mirror. Flowers appear fresh as if they grew inside the building. Engineers monitor boilers, elevators, and air systems that guests never think about until something goes wrong. In a grand hotel, the most important success is invisibility. If a guest notices the machinery, the spell weakens. So the staff learn to move around guests like water. They learn how to reset a room quickly, how to deliver food without noise, how to repair something before anyone can complain. The kitchen is its own city. Orders arrive in waves. A quiet breakfast service can become a flood when a conference ends. A ballroom event can require timing so precise that the entire staff seems to inhale and exhale together. Every plate is part of the performance. Every delay is a crack in the myth. This is why the plaza feels different from ordinary luxury. It is not only expensive, it is rehearsed. It has memory. The building remembers what works, and the staff remember how to reproduce it. For decades, this rehearsal becomes part of New York's cultural education. People visit the plaza to learn how wealth behaves. They learn the posture, the pace, the polite distance. Even those who never stay there absorb the imagery. A city teaches its citizens class lessons through places like this. And that is why a change in the plaza is never just a business change. It feels like a change in the city's self-image. Chapter 3. When a legend becomes paperwork. A myth can last a long time. A building needs owners. Owners have goals, and goals change with the economy. Across the 20th century, the plaza changes hands and changes managers. These shifts are usually framed as modernization, a renovation, an upgrade, a new operator promising to preserve tradition while meeting new expectations. Some change is necessary. A building cannot survive a century without mechanical updates and repairs. Standards of comfort rise. Guests expect air conditioning, newer plumbing, more technology, more quiet. Infrastructure age. A hotel either evolves behind the scenes or it becomes a beautiful inconvenience. But there is another kind of change that arrives with corporate logic. A change that treats the hotel less like a cultural institution and more like a portfolio asset. In the portfolio mindset, the question is not what makes the plaza special. The question is what makes the plaza efficient. You start to see the pressure points: labor costs, service complexity, space usage, turnover. A room is no longer judged by what it contributes to the story. It is judged by what it contributes to revenue. A bar becomes a line item. A dining room becomes a potential retail lease. A lounge becomes an underperforming asset. A tradition becomes a cost center. The danger is not that any single change is catastrophic. The danger is accumulation. When you remove one small piece of care, the hotel still looks fine. When you remove another, it still looks fine. Eventually you realize the hotel feels different, and no one can name the moment when it shifted. That is how institutions lose their atmosphere. Slowly, then suddenly. The first people to feel it are often not the guests. They are the workers and the long-term residents. A resident who has lived there for years can sense when the polish begins to thin. A waiter can feel when staffing drops just enough that service becomes strained. A doorman can sense when management values rules over judgment. A housekeeper can feel when the schedule becomes tighter and perfection becomes harder to achieve. These are labor stories, but they are also cultural stories. Because at the plaza, labor is the culture. Service is the product. The hotel sells an experience of order, and order is maintained by human beings. Meanwhile, New York itself is changing. Midtown becomes denser. Competition increases. New luxury hotels appear with modern layouts and newer systems. The plaza must compete not only with the past, but with the present. The city also begins to formalize preservation. New York learns, sometimes painfully, that historic buildings can disappear quickly under redevelopment pressure. And the plaza, already part of the city's image, becomes something the city wants to protect. In 1969, the exterior of the plaza is designated a New York City landmark. That decision signals a shift. The building is no longer only a private business. It is also a piece of the city's identity that the public has a stake in. The designation does not freeze the building completely, but it sets boundaries on what can be changed. It tells owners that they are stewards as well as investors. Later, the plaza is listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1978, and in 1986, it is designated a National Historic Landmark. These recognitions do not make the building untouchable, but they make a statement that the plaza matters beyond its owners. It matters to history. Yet history does not pay bills. The plaza still needs revenue. It still needs investment. And by the 1,980 seconds, finance culture is shifting in a way that makes iconic properties more vulnerable. The idea of the trophy property grows stronger. A trophy property is not bought because it will produce stable profit. It is bought because owning it signals power. It is a public declaration that you have arrived. In the trophy era, the plaza becomes an object of desire for someone who wants to point at a corner of Manhattan and say it belongs to them. someone who wants the newspapers to print a name next to the address, someone who believes value can be forced out of a symbol through willpower and publicity. That belief leads to deals built on leverage, and leverage changes everything. Because the moment debt enters the story, the building stops being only a place. It becomes a timetable, a schedule of payments, a problem that must be solved faster than the hotel can naturally move. That brings us to 1988. By the 1970 seconds and 1980 seconds, New York goes through periods of financial crisis, civic stress, and cultural reinvention. The city is still the city, but the mood changes. In rough years, luxury has to justify itself differently. It becomes less about optimism and more about insulation. The plaza continues selling a controlled world, but the value of control increases when the streets feel uncertain. At the same time, modern finance becomes more aggressive. Corporations learn to buy and sell assets quickly. Real estate becomes more financialized. The language shifts. People talk less about stewardship and more about return, less about tradition and more about repositioning. A building like the plaza becomes attractive not only because it can operate as a hotel, but because it can be used as collateral. It can be leveraged. It can be turned into a symbol for an owner's brand. It can be used to raise more money elsewhere. This is the environment that makes the trophy era possible. The plaza is still a building, but it is also a marketing device. And when marketing becomes as important as operations, the line between legend and commodity begins to blur. Chapter 41988. Debt enters the lobby. When Donald Trump buys the plaza in 1988, it fits the decade. Big deals, big publicity, big confidence. A businessman who understands spectacle acquires a building that already lives on spectacle. The purchase relies heavily on borrowing, with large loans arranged through multiple banks. The specifics are complex, but the effect is simple. Debt creates urgency. Debt turns an iconic building into a schedule. This is the trap of leverage. It does not only create risk, it creates a new kind of time, a faster time, a time that is measured by interest payments rather than by seasons. A historic hotel operates on slow time. It depends on relationships, reputation, and habits. It depends on staff who know the place and on guests who trust the name. It depends on maintenance that cannot be postponed forever, because postponed maintenance becomes failure. It depends on a culture that takes years to build and minutes to break. When you carry a heavy debt load, patience becomes expensive. Pressure appears as cost-cutting. Decisions prioritize immediate savings. The labor that makes luxury feel effortless becomes a target because it is a major recurring expense. The invisible craft becomes visible as a cost. And once craft is treated like a cost, the atmosphere begins to change. There is also a deeper tension. A new owner wants to imprint a personal brand, but the plaza already has a brand older than any individual, a brand that belongs, in some sense, to the city. When you buy a symbol, you also buy the expectations attached to it, and those expectations are not negotiable on a quarterly schedule. Conflict grows with residents and workers. Residents worry about stability in what they consider home. Workers worry about jobs and conditions. The hotel becomes a site of negotiation, and at times confrontation, because the plaza name adds symbolic weight to every dispute. The same disagreement that might be invisible in another building becomes a public drama here, because the building itself is a headline. Even the act of renovation carries meaning. In an ordinary building, replacing fixtures is maintenance. In a landmark hotel, replacing fixtures feels like rewriting memory. When people hear that pieces of the plaza interior are being removed, they do not only hear a renovation story, they hear a story about a legend being taken apart. They hear the sound of history being handled like inventory. Then, the broader economy shifts. The early 1990 seconds bring recessionary pressure. Real estate optimism fades. Tourism and corporate spending soften. For a debt-heavy ownership structure, that environment is dangerous. By 1992, the situation becomes unsustainable. Creditors step in. Trump relinquishes control through a restructuring, ending his direct hold on the property. The plaza has survived owners before, but this episode leaves a scar on the story. It proves something important. A symbol can be bought with borrowed money, but a symbol cannot be bullied into paying interest forever. The Trump chapter also changes how New Yorkers think about trophy properties. It becomes a cautionary tale, not because the plaza stops being beautiful, but because beauty does not pay interest by itself. A legend has to operate like a business to survive, and some business models do not fit the internal physics of an old hotel. After the early 1992s, the plaza enters a new ownership phase involving international investors. A controlling stake is sold in the mid-1990s to new partners including Kwek, Lengbeng, and Prince Al-Walid bin Talal. The pattern becomes clearer than ever. The plaza is not only a New York hotel, it is a global trophy in a global market of prestige. Global ownership changes the stakes. If the plaza is an asset in an international portfolio, decisions may be driven by financial logic more than local sentiment. But local sentiment remains loud, because the plaza is part of New York's self-image. The building belongs to investors on paper, but it belongs to the city in imagination. And those two forms of belonging often collide. The collision becomes especially sharp when the next big plan arrives. A plan that does not require destroying the facade to transform the meaning of the building. The plaza also exposes something uncomfortable about prestige. Prestige can be monetized, but it is not the same thing as cash flow. Prestige draws attention. It draws bookings. It draws events. But it also draws costs, because maintaining prestige requires labor and care. When a leveraged owner looks for quick savings, the first targets are often the invisible ones. Staffing levels, maintenance schedules, training time. These are costs that can be reduced on paper without changing the marble. But the marble is not what makes the guest return. The guest returns because the building feels alive and attentive. The Trump era becomes a widely discussed example of a mismatch between a building's identity and a financial structure. The plaza needs slow investment and steady operations. Leverage demands speed. The hotel becomes a tug-of-war between those two clocks. When the restructuring ends the ownership in 1992, the plaza does not simply change hands. It changes reputation. People begin to see that even the most famous address can be destabilized by financial engineering. That realization will shape how later owners think about the safest way to extract value from the property. Chapter 5. The city tries to save the soul. Most people think of landmarks as exteriors. Skylines, facades, stone. But the soul of the plaza has always been inside. The Palm Court is not just a room. It is a ritual chamber where New York pretends it is calm. The lobby is not just a corridor. It is a theater of arrival. The Oak Room and Oak Bar, with their dark wood and old club atmosphere, carry a history of power performed in private. The Grand Ballroom is a machine for turning gatherings into legends. By the early 2000s, New Yorkers worry that these interiors could be lost, not necessarily through demolition, but through conversion. A famous room can be remodeled until it no longer feels like itself. A dining room can become retail. A ballroom can be divided. The myth can be hollowed out without anyone touching the facade. Preservation in New York is political. It requires arguments, hearings, evidence, and public pressure. It requires people to speak not only about beauty, but about meaning. Why a room matters. Why a ceiling matters. Why a corridor matters. Why a city should care about interiors that some citizens may never personally use. With the plaza, the pressure becomes intense because the building is so deeply embedded in the city's identity. It is not just a hotel people admire. It is a building people use to explain New York to themselves. If you remove the rooms, you remove part of the city's shared vocabulary. In 2005, the New York City Landmarks Preservation Commission designates key interior spaces of the plaza as protected. This is not sentimentality. It is law. A framework meant to keep the most important public interiors from being stripped or fundamentally altered. The interior designation is a recognition that the plaza story lives in rooms, not only in stone. The light under glass, the curve of a corridor, the scale of a ballroom, the feeling of entering a space that seems to remember you even if it has never met you. But it is also important to understand what preservation cannot do. It can protect rooms and features. It can protect materials, layouts, and visual identities. It can slow down or block certain kinds of destruction. It cannot protect a culture. It cannot require the same level of service. It cannot force a business model to prioritize history over profit. It cannot guarantee that workers will remain. It cannot ensure that a long-term resident will not be displaced by a new financial strategy. Preservation can protect the stage. It cannot protect the performance. And there is another limit that matters in a city like New York. Preservation is often a compromise. It protects what can be argued successfully, what can be documented, what can be defended in a public process. It rarely protects every detail. It creates islands of permanence inside a sea of change. For the plaza, the protected interiors help keep the public face intact. They ensure that certain rooms remain recognizable, so the building can continue to function as a cultural symbol. But the designation does not prevent a different kind of transformation, a transformation in ownership, access, and purpose, because the next strategy is already forming. A strategy that treats the plaza not only as a hotel, but as a brand to be packaged into private property. The 2005 interior designation also teaches a civic lesson. A city can decide that a room matters, that an interior can be part of public heritage, even if it is inside a private building. This is a powerful idea, because it expands what a city considers worth protecting. It also creates a new kind of negotiation. Owners must plan renovations around protected features. Designers must work within constraints. Preservation advocates must choose which battles to fight. The result is rarely perfect for anyone, but it prevents the simplest kind of erasure. At the plaza, that means certain public spaces remain recognizable to generations who have never lived through the building's early years. People can still walk in and feel that they have entered a piece of New York history. Even if the economics behind that feeling have changed, the feeling itself remains available. Chapter 6. The Condo Strategy and the Price of Belonging. In 2004, the plaza is purchased by a developer group led by LAD Properties. The plan is not modest. It is to transform much of the building into luxury residences. The concept is simple. Take the prestige of the hotel brand and sell it as private real estate. Turn rooms into condominiums. Turn a public legend into personal property. This is the logic of a new era. A hotel room produces revenue over time. A residence sale produces revenue immediately. In the world of modern development, immediate revenue is seductive. It is cleaner on the balance sheet. It can pay for renovation. It can reward investors faster. The plaza name adds a premium. The address adds a premium. Central Park adds a premium. And the global market for luxury property adds another layer. By the early 2000s, New York real estate has become a global instrument. A luxury unit is not only a home. It can be a store of value, a safe deposit box in the form of architecture. So the plaza closes for a major renovation and conversion. This is not a cosmetic refresh. It is surgery. Modern systems have to be integrated. Layouts have to be reimagined. Private kitchens and baths must be built for residences. The building must be updated to match modern safety and comfort expectations. And all of it must be done while respecting landmark protections that keep key public interiors recognizable. This creates a uniquely difficult challenge. How do you modernize a building without making it feel modern? How do you install the future without showing the future? How do you sell the aura of timelessness while ripping open walls behind the scenes? During renovation, the plaza becomes temporarily absent from daily city life. A landmark that once hosted endless motion becomes wrapped in scaffolding and planning meetings. For New Yorkers, it is a reminder that even icons can go offline. A myth can be paused. A building can be silent. When the plaza reopens in 2008, it returns as a hybrid. Part hotel, part residential building, part brand platform for selling a lifestyle. The public rooms resume their roles. The lobby returns as theater. The palm court returns as ritual. The building still looks like the plaza and still photographs like the plaza. But the internal reality has shifted. A significant part of the building is no longer a place where anyone can check in for a night. It is private, behind doors owned by people whose relationship to the plaza may be different from the hotel's traditional relationship to the city. A traditional grand hotel exists to host strangers. Its identity is hospitality. It must feel open in spirit, even if it is exclusive in price. It depends on the idea that you can arrive, be welcomed, and leave without leaving a trace. A luxury condominium exists for owners. Its identity is possession. It must feel protected, controlled, stable. It reduces friction from outsiders. It values privacy over theater. So the hybrid plaza becomes a compromise between two philosophies. The hotel side must perform welcome. The residential side must perform separation. This tension appears in small details. Entrance. Elevator access. Security decisions. The way staff is instructed to guide different populations through the same building. The way certain corridors become off-limits. The way certain services become tailored to owners rather than guests. The old plaza imagination is a unified stage. The new plaza reality is segmented. Segmentation changes the meaning of luxury. In the 20th century, luxury at the plaza is often about experience, ceremony, and service. In the 21st century, luxury is increasingly about ownership, not only staying at a famous place, but possessing a piece of it. The plaza, once a public stage where wealth performed itself, becomes partly a vault where wealth hides. And yet the myth remains useful. Tourists still stop outside. Film crews still use the façade as shorthand for money. Guests still book rooms because they want to step into an image they have seen their whole lives. People still arrange meetings there because the address still carries weight. This is the strange resilience of icons. They can change internally while maintaining an external story the public recognizes. They can become more private and still function as a public symbol. But for some New Yorkers, the condo era feels like a shift from civic icon to branded product. The plaza is still visible, but parts of it are no longer accessible. The legend is still told, but it is told with new terms. Square footage, ownership, exclusivity measured not only by price, but by control. In a city built on public life, that kind of privatization carries emotional charge. Not everyone believes a landmark should become a collection of private assets. But the market rewards that transformation, and the market is a powerful storyteller too. The condo transformation also reshapes the meaning of the word guest. In the old hotel model, everyone inside is a guest. Some are short-term, some long-term, but the hotel is fundamentally a place of hospitality. In the hybrid model, there are guests and there are owners, and the building must serve both without letting one group disturb the other. This can create strange social choreography. An owner may want the glamour of the brand without the inconvenience of constant outsiders. A hotel guest may want the fantasy of living inside a palace without realizing parts of the palace are now private territory. Staff become translators between these expectations. They maintain the illusion that the building is unified, even when it is divided. The hybrid model also changes the stakes of preservation. A hotel can argue for changes to improve operations. A residential building argues for changes to improve privacy and security. These arguments do not always align with public nostalgia for open civic icons. The plaza becomes a place where the public can still touch the myth, but only on certain terms. And those terms are enforced quietly, not with signs, but with roots, with doors that require keys, with elevators that stop for some people and not for others, with staff who guide movement in ways that feel polite but are also strategic. The building is still elegant, but the elegance now includes separation as part of its design. Chapter 7, The Global Plaza and the Question That Never Ends. In 2018, Katara Hospitality, a Qatari firm, acquires full ownership of the plaza for a reported price around $600 million. The headline focuses on the number, but the deeper meaning is the shift it represents. A century earlier, the plaza is built to express the ambitions of American wealth. Now it is part of a global portfolio of luxury properties. The plaza remains a symbol of New York, but it is also a unit in an international system of high-end assets. This is the modern reality of major cities. Iconic buildings become nodes in global networks of capital. They are protected locally, but traded globally. They are remembered by the public, but priced by investors. In this world, the plaza is both unique and standardized. Unique because its name carries a specific American myth. Standardized because it competes in a market where ultra-luxury is constantly being reinvented and compared across cities. Owners manage portfolios, not only buildings. They measure performance. They think in categories like brand position and asset value. And yet, the plaza remains stubbornly local in another sense. It sits on a corner where New Yorkers have projected dreams for generations. It is embedded in the city's cultural memory. It is tied to stories of aspiration, theater, fashion, commerce, and power. It is part of the emotional map of the city. That creates permanent tension. When a building is both global asset and local myth, who gets to decide what it becomes? Law protects certain rooms. Public pressure protects certain traditions. Market forces push for the most profitable configuration. These forces do not align neatly. They collide. The plaza becomes a case study in modern urban life. How symbols survive by adapting. How adaptation can hollow out the meaning that made the symbol powerful in the first place. How preservation can defend the visible while the invisible changes anyway. How a city can protect its landmarks without being able to protect the social world those landmarks once supported. It is tempting to end with nostalgia, to say the plaza was once pure and is now corrupted. But the plaza was never pure. It was built to impress, to exclude, to define status. It was always an architecture of power. What changes is the form power takes. In 1907, power is expressed through stone and ceremony. In the trophy era, power is expressed through leverage and publicity. In the condo era, power is expressed through ownership and privacy. In the global era, power is expressed through portfolios, branding, and capital that moves across borders faster than the old plaza era could have imagined. Through all of it, one truth remains. A place like this is not only a building, it is a story people buy into. Sometimes by paying for a room, sometimes by purchasing a deed, sometimes simply by standing outside and taking a photo and feeling for a moment that they are close to the center of something important. So we return to the corner where this story began. Fifth Avenue and Central Park South. Stone and copper. Traffic and taxis. Tourists lifting phones. Locals walking by as if they have seen it 1,000 times, because they have. Inside, someone checks in, hoping the myth still works. Someone schedules a meeting in a room that has hosted a century of conversations. Someone pours tea under glass that has filtered sunlight for generations. Someone glides across a lobby floor built to make ordinary movement feel like a performance. And somewhere behind the scenes, staff keep the machine running, because the plaza is not only owned by whoever holds the deed, it is also held together by the people who know how to make grandeur feel natural. That is the final lesson of the plaza. Icons do not survive because they are made of stone. They survive because people keep choosing to believe in them. And belief, like money, is a force that never stops moving. What makes the plaza endure in the global era is that it offers something modern luxury often lacks. A sense of accumulated time. New luxury can be impressive, but it cannot manufacture memory overnight. The plaza has memory built into its reputation. People arrive already believing they understand what the place means. That belief is valuable because it makes the building resilient to fashion. Design trends change. New hotels open. New towers rise. But the plaza remains one of the names that outsiders recognize instantly. At the same time, global ownership means the building is constantly compared. It must justify itself within a portfolio. It must maintain standards that match international expectations. It must keep the brand alive not only for New Yorkers, but for a worldwide audience of travelers and buyers. So the plaza continues doing what it has always done. It sells a controlled world. It sells a story. And it relies on labor to make that story feel true. If you want to understand the plaza, remember this. The building is not only stone, it is coordination, it is training, it is judgment. It is thousands of small decisions made by people who know that the slightest crack can show through the shine. That is why the plaza remains a powerful symbol, not because it is untouched by change, because it is a master of controlled change. Consider what happens on a day when the plaza hosts multiple worlds at once. In the lobby, a family from out of town pauses to take in the ceiling, trying to decide how quietly they should speak. In a corner, a business traveler checks a watch and looks impatient, as if the building is too slow for the schedule. Near the front, a couple dressed for an evening event rehearses confidence, stepping carefully as if the floor might judge them. The staff read all of this instantly. They know who needs reassurance and who needs distance. They know when to offer help and when to offer invisibility. They have mastered the art of making very different guests feel that the building was built for them personally. That is why the plaza can function as a public legend. It is not only for the wealthy, it is for anyone who wants to stand close to wealth and feel the heat of it. You can walk in, buy a tea service, and for an hour you can borrow a roll. The building lets people rent identity the way they rent rooms. Over the decades, popular culture multiplies the effect. When the plaza appears in films and television, it becomes a symbol that people recognize even if they have never visited. The building becomes part of childhood fantasy for some, part of adult aspiration for others. The name becomes a piece of American vocabulary. That vocabulary is powerful, but it is also fragile. Because the more a building becomes a symbol, the more sensitive people become to changes in it. A symbol is expected to remain consistent. The plaza is expected to feel like the plaza. So when it shifts, the shift is felt not only as renovation, but as betrayal. The interior protection also reveals a deeper truth about cities. A city is not only streets and skylines, it is interiors where people gather, rooms where culture happens, spaces where strangers share rituals and learn the behavior of public life. In many modern buildings, interiors are disposable. A restaurant becomes a store becomes a bank becomes a gym. Cities change inside their buildings faster than they change on their facades. The plaza is the opposite. Its interiors are part of its identity, so losing them would mean losing the thing people actually mean when they say the name. That is why the interior designation becomes so significant. It is a declaration that the city is willing to treat certain rooms as civic heritage. But heritage is expensive. Protecting a room does not pay for restoring it. A landmark designation can preserve a space visually while the economic conditions around it become more aggressive. In that way, preservation can sometimes feel like holding a photograph of a person who is still alive but living a different life. The plaza survives this contradiction by turning heritage into value. The protected interiors become a selling point. They allow the building to claim continuity. They allow marketing to say that the legend remains. The result is that preservation both resists commercialization and, unintentionally, becomes part of what makes commercialization profitable. After the 2008 reopening, the plaza exists in two time zones at once. In the public rooms, it performs the early 20th century fantasy. It offers chandeliers, formal service, and the feeling of stepping into a story that began before you were born. In the private residential sections, it performs contemporary luxury, bigger kitchens, private layouts, security, ownership. These two time zones influence each other. The hotel side benefits from the aura of exclusive ownership. The residential side benefits from the aura of hotel service and the myth of hospitality. The building becomes a platform that can sell multiple versions of the same dream. But the platform requires constant management. It requires rules about noise, access, and privacy. It requires agreements about how common spaces are used. It requires staff training that is not only about service, but about boundaries. In a purely public hotel, a staff member can treat every guest as a guest. In a hybrid building, a staff member must know who has rights, who has privileges, and who is passing through. This is where the plaza story becomes a modern story about class. Because boundaries are no longer only about price. They are about ownership. You can be wealthy enough to stay in a suite and still be guided away from a private entrance. You can be famous enough to draw attention and still be reminded, gently, that certain spaces are not yours. The building becomes a map of modern hierarchy, drawn in marble and security policies. And yet people keep coming, because the plaza still offers a rare thing, a sense that New York is not only a city of speed and novelty, but a city that can still hold ceremony. Closing. There is a temptation to treat the plaza as a single idea. Either it is a triumph of beauty, or it is a symbol of inequality. Either it is preserved, or it is lost. Either it is public, or it is private. But the plaza has never been only one thing. It has always been a negotiation. Between modern convenience and old-world theater, between visible luxury and invisible labor, between a city that changes too fast and a building that promises to slow time down. That is why the plaza keeps returning in New York conversations. Because New Yorkers live inside negotiations every day. They negotiate space. They negotiate noise. They negotiate rent. They negotiate memory. They negotiate who gets to stay and who gets pushed out. The plaza concentrates those negotiations into one address. It shows how a building can become a mirror. When the city is optimistic, the plaza looks like celebration. When the city is anxious, the plaza looks like insulation. When finance is aggressive, the plaza becomes a target. When preservation is urgent, the plaza becomes a cause. And if you look closely, the most revealing story is not the list of owners. It is the continuity of the workforce and the continuity of the rituals. A building can change hands many times, but the daily performance of luxury is what keeps the myth alive. That performance depends on knowledge. Knowledge of how to open a door with timing that feels effortless. Knowledge of how to keep a lobby calm when 100 arrivals happen at once. Knowledge of how to fix a small problem before it becomes a public complaint. knowledge of how to protect a guest's dignity, even when the guest is not dignified. Those skills are history too. They are part of what a landmark really is. A landmark is not only an object, it is an operating tradition. The plaza also teaches a lesson about what we mean when we say something belongs to a city. The plaza does not belong to New York in a legal sense. It belongs to whoever holds the deed. But the plaza belongs to New York in a cultural sense because the city has used it as a reference point for generations. The building sits inside the collective imagination, and that imagination has real power. It can shape preservation decisions. It can shape public pressure. It can shape what owners believe they can do without backlash. Yet, imagination has limits too. It cannot cancel interest payments. It cannot replace broken pipes. It cannot run a kitchen. It cannot staff a ballroom event. It cannot prevent a financial model from demanding change. So the plaza survives by balancing two forces: public myth and private math, memory and money, ceremony and efficiency. If you want to see that balance in one simple image, picture the lobby on a winter afternoon. Outside, the park is cold and gray. Inside, the light is warm. The sound is controlled. Somewhere nearby, tea is being poured with careful pace. A couple takes photos, trying to capture the feeling of being inside the legend. A business meeting begins in a quiet corner, the conversation polite but sharp. A staff member glides past, appearing calm even while tracking a dozen tasks at once. Everything looks permanent. Everything looks as if it has always been this way. But behind the scenes, the building is always being adjusted. Schedules are being rewritten. Rooms are being repaired. Budgets are being reviewed. Owners are making decisions about what to invest in and what to delay. Managers are deciding how many staff are needed to maintain the illusion. And staff are deciding, every minute, how to make a demanding environment feel effortless. That is the real drama of the plaza. Not a single scandal. Not a single purchase. Not a single renovation. The drama is the constant work required to keep a legend functioning like a business. In a way, the plaza is a lesson in how cities preserve meaning. They do not preserve it by freezing time completely. They preserve it by repeating rituals, by protecting certain symbols, and by retelling stories that remind people why the symbols matter. The plaza is retold because it is useful. It helps people talk about class, aspiration, and change. It helps people talk about what New York was, what it is, and what it might become. So, when you stand at Fifth Avenue in Central Park South and look up at the stone and copper, you are not only looking at a hotel, you are looking at a century-long argument. An argument about who gets to own history. An argument about whether a public symbol can survive inside a private market. An argument about how much of a city can be sold without selling the city's soul. The plaza does not answer that argument. It simply makes it visible. And the next time you pass that corner, notice the smallest details. The way the doors open and close, the way people slow down as they enter, the way the staff guide movement without commanding it, the way the building invites you to believe that order is natural. Order is never natural. Order is made. And at the plaza, it has been made and remade for more than 100 years.